any questions as well directly from me as we go through. So just going to press play. This is a session which is really kind of like looking at bit of an introduction to sort of mental health in general in terms of the context, but really particularly thinking about pressure and stress and the difference between when we're under that healthy sort of pressure and we feel engaged and motivated versus when we feel really stressed and overwhelmed and can't see the wood for the trees and sort of quite panicky. So we'll be having a look at some of the typical common stress factors that you might be able to relate to, and how we can spot some of the signs of stress, but also what can we do about it? So how can we try and sort of manage it and try and mitigate it, particularly when we're sort of we're thinking about sort of planning our big day going forwards at some point. Why should we care about this stuff? I mean, usually when I'm sort of talking to sort of various people in organizations on this topic, we talk about the fact that there's the business case, the legal case, but for us at the moment, it's just really about looking after ourselves, trying to notice when we're feeling sort of stressed and being able to take some time out to look after ourselves and think about some of those tools and techniques that can help us, which we'll be going through this session. As Nikita said, please feel free to ask any questions as we go along, either in the chat box. You can sort of put them there in the chat function, and they can either go for everyone to see or just to me directly. I'm happy to share a copy of the slides as well if you want a copy of these afterwards. And please feel free to sort of ask as we go along. Don't feel that you have to wait for the end of the session to raise a question. But also thinking about sort of stress and our mental health, because apparently when we are in a more positive mood, we are 12% more productive. And this was research from the University of Warwick, which I think is absolutely fascinating, the fact that they found it so precise. And what this means is that we can get those boring things done. So the household chores, putting the bins out, the laundry, loading the dishwasher, those kind of things. When we're in a positive mood, we can just take them in our stride. They don't seem quite such an onerous task as to when you're feeling a bit overwhelmed and daunted by everything, and everything feels, like an incredible chore that has to be done. So let's start off thinking, first of all, about our mental health in general. And this is a particular favourite topic of mine to talk about. And what we mean by mental health is how we cope with the ups and downs of everyday life, let alone the pandemic, let alone when we've got a big wedding that we're hoping to plan for the next few months. Mental health is part of, the day-to-day stuff that we have to deal with. It's how we feel about ourselves and our future. So even though things are still a little bit uncertain, we're waiting for the roadmap to be announced next week, it still determines how we feel about the future going forwards. It can help us deal with the bigger negative events and stresses in our life as well, so those bigger things that can knock us off course. And it's about our self-esteem and confidence in our decision-making and the things that we do. And it determines in some part how we sort of think, feel and behave in general. So if we're feeling, a bit run down, a bit negative, it can, make us feel a bit more pessimistic, and that's going to sort of show up in our behaviours in terms of being a bit more apprehensive or impatient and a bit snappy with people. And like physical health, we all have mental health on a spectrum. Ideally, we want people to be at the upper end of the spectrum. So this is when they're sort of they're healthy and they're sort of they're able to notice sooner that they're not coping with things before they get to the point where they're struggling or they're really unwell. And one of my favourite phrases around mental health and how we handle things is that an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. So, particularly when it comes to stress, I think, the sooner we can notice that we're struggling with sort of decisions and situations and stuff like that, and things are building up, the sooner we can notice those triggers and notice that we're feeling a bit stressed, we can do something about it before we get to the point where we're really overwhelmed and struggling and feeling really unwell. So, quick question, what do we mean by stress? I think this is one of those terms that we hear a lot of. but what does stress mean to you? And, if you're happy to sort of, answer in the chat box, is there a particular word, connotation, definition that you think of when you hear the word stress that you'll be happy to share? That would be fantastic. Because it seems to mean so many things to different people. But out of interest, is there anything that, you think of when you hear that term? So one of the things that we've got there is just getting very upset and crying. Yeah, absolutely. I think this sort of stress can be, something that we see in the emotions and the behaviours that we can pick up in ourselves and other people. When we Google sort of what is stress, it can come up with over 1.7 billion results, and being overwhelmed. I think that's a great explanation for for stress as well, and that leads us really nicely into the definition, which is that stress is a situation where the demands on a person exceeds that person's resources or ability to cope. And what I particularly like about this definition is the fact that it suggests that it's not anything which is at fault with the person at all. It's just the fact that there's so many sort of demands, pressures being placed on that person that they don't have the resources or the ability to cope. And, quite often that tends to be timescales, deadlines, or just sometimes just like, the sheer volume of things that they have to deal with. So absolutely sort of, just being overwhelmed by things, can be a massive kind of, stress sort of, definition, and it really does play into that. Stress in itself is designed to keep us safe. We've had stress, since evolutionary times. It's the fight, flight, or freeze response that we have to keep us out of danger. And this came from when we were sort of, evolutionary, when we sort of, lived out in the wilds. We had to have a stress response to make us quick to act to dangers, to being attacked by a tiger. What happens when we're feeling stressed is that our heart beats faster because it's trying to get extra blood and extra oxygen around our bodies in order for us to either fight off the tiger or to run away from it. That's why sometimes people can feel very dizzy and lightheaded when they're feeling stressed, because of all the extra blood and oxygen going around them. Our adrenaline and our cortisol levels rise. Again, we're preparing to fight whatever wild tiger might be there. Our sleep can get disrupted. Again, if our body thinks that we're about to be attacked by a tiger, the last thing it wants us to do is to have a little nap. So that's why when we're feeling very stressed and very anxious and overwhelmed, it can be really difficult to fall off to sleep. It can be very difficult to relax, to switch off. Quite often we can wake up in the middle of the night worrying about things, wake up first thing in the morning, feeling very anxious. And our eating patterns can be affected. For some people, this can be that they absolutely go off their food and they lose their appetite completely. For other people, they might go for the comfort eating, the biscuits, the cake, those kind of things. And there's a whole load of sources of stress and pressure. I guess we hear a lot around, work-related stress, but, when we're sort of planning our own weddings, there's a lot of stress and pressure that we have on ourselves. It's a big, important day for us. We want it to go right. We have our family considerations, we have community considerations, and also at this time, we have, the external sources of stress and pressure in terms of the lockdown, the rules, the regulations, the government announcement. So these external things, the world and society, are adding to our stress levels at the moment, particularly when we're sort of trying to plan our big day. One of the things that is really important is to try and think about what makes you stress, because as humans we're all unique, we're all individual. So what is stressful for one person might be exciting to somebody else. It might even be water off a duck's back to somebody else. But are there any particular situations or triggers that you notice that make you feel stressed, or that make other people perhaps feel stressed at all? And again, if you can answer in the chat box, or if you just want to take yourself on mute and answer, that's absolutely fine. So what are the specific triggers that make make us feel stressed? You know, are they related to planning a wedding, or, you know, or just in general? Too many emails. Yeah, I think a lot of people can relate to that one. Yeah, so, you know, that constant barrage of emails, messages coming into people. Yeah, not being able to plan. Yeah, you know, as humans, we like that sort of, you know, that certainty, that predictability. You know, we like to be able to plan things and be in control and know what to expect. Yeah, absolutely. The unknown can make us feel very anxious and very stressed as well. And, you know, we're all different. You know, we have a different tolerances for, you know, for the unknowns and uncertainties. Some people thrive in it. Some people, you know, really like the structure, the strict discipline and the routine. And what we find is that different things are making us feel stressed. Living in restrictions, yeah. You know, it is really difficult living in restrictions. You know, we haven't got our freedoms to, you know, to do what we want, you know, to interact with other people, to, you know, live our lives, our social lives, and make plans for things. And what we tend to find is that um, stress triggers tend to fall into one of three factors. So one of the top ones is protecting things that we care about. So, you know, looking after our safety, you know, keeping away from, you know, the COVID virus. You know, that's ourselves, that's our friends, that's our families, that's our loved ones. You know, but protecting the things that we care about. So protecting our homes, being able to pay the bills, looking after our loved ones. You know, for people who've got children, it's looking after their children whilst they're homeschooling, but also protecting things that we care about is our big day as well. You know, that's something that's really important to us. We want it to go really well. So, you know, that is, you know, quite naturally, you know, a big source of stress for us. The second one is social evaluation, you know, so where we feel that we're being judged or we might be seen negatively by other people can be a big stress factor. So this is why things like public speaking, tests, exams, interviews, all of these work-related things can be a source of stress for some people because they're putting their head above the parapet. Again, when it comes to our weddings, you know, we're being, you know, we're judged, you know, we feel like we're being evaluated on our big day. You know, people are looking at us to see, you know, seeing what we're doing, what have we arranged, you know, what have we sort of coordinated, you know, and we want it to be a good day. We want it to be successful. You know, we don't want anything to go wrong because, you know, we're, you know, we want it to be, you know, a great, you know, lovely event for everybody involved. And the third one is that lack of control. So not being able to plan, as you know, as people have said in the chat box, you know, dealing with the unknown, living those restrictions. You know, we don't have control over these restrictions at the moment. You know, it's still very uncertain. We don't quite know when the restrictions are going to be lifted, when schools are going to be reopened, you know, when we can sort of, you know, meet up with other people again, let alone sort of, you know, plan our big days and our wedding days. So, you know, the lack of control, you know, the situation or success seems beyond our power. This also goes to things like communication, you know, so when we don't get, you know, the feedback, the answers that we want, that can be stressful because we don't have control, you know, particularly when you're working or trying to deal with big organizations and you just can't find that one person that you need to talk to directly. Your kind of your voicemails, your emails just seem to go into the black void. When you're on public transport, you know, not knowing when the train or the bus is going to get starting again, you know, so not having the control, feedback, information about a situation can be very stressful for us. And what we find happens is that these pressures, the stresses, the demands, they flow into our stress bucket, you know, so whether that's, you know, the restrictions that we're living in, you know, the not being able to plan things, the work things, the emails that we've got our inbox, all of these flow into our stress bucket. And, you know, we can get stuff done, we can sort of, you know, get work projects completed, you know, which can keep the stress to a manageable level. We also have our tap that can sort of, you know, keep the stress levels down. So there's various good coping strategies that can sort of help release the stress. You know, the typical things are kind of like the exercise, the switching off, the relaxing. There's also the bad coping strategies, the quick fixes, and the typical culprits tend to be the caffeine, the alcohol, the cigarettes, the junk food, the chocolate cake and the biscuits, you know, which are the quick fix and they help in the moment. But then what happens is that when our stress bucket gets too full, that's when we start to overflow. You know, this is when sort of, you know, the problems start to overflow and we get the emotional snapping. So next question is, how do you know that either your stress bucket or someone else's stress bucket is just getting that wee bit too full? What are some of the signs, the symptoms, the behaviors that we might notice? And again, this is all about having the awareness to notice these things, so that the sooner we can pick up on these signs, we can do something and help us sort of stay at the upper end of the mental health spectrum. So what might some of the signs be that someone's stress bucket is, getting a little bit too full and overflowing? So crying, yeah, lots of people saying that sort of, they get very emotional, and for no reason. That's a really interesting point, actually. Yeah, sometimes it's perfectly normal, for us to feel emotional if there's a valid reason for it. Sometimes, when our stress bucket's too full, it's that emotions that overflow. We cry for no reason, or sometimes it's the little things that normally we won't be bothered about as well. Avoiding social media, yes, yeah. I think sort of, staying away from things as well. And I think avoiding social interactions, generally can be, a sign for some people that they just, can't cope. Swearing a lot, yes, I think sort of, yeah, I think the swear buckets get very full when the stress bucket's getting very full as well. So a couple of people agreeing with you there, Kirsty, on that one. Swear buckets and the stress buckets go hand in hand. So there's all sorts of things that we can pick up on that sort of, indicate to us that we're getting a bit stressed. And it's about knowing your own stress signature. And again, in the same way that different triggers are going to affect different people, we all have our own unique stress signature. So for some people, they might notice that they're sort of, they're feeling a bit more headachy, aches, pains. They've just got that sort of tension in their shoulders, their shoulders are around their ears. For some people, it can be the mind things. So they find it really difficult to concentrate, to make decisions, worrying about little things that normally just wouldn't bother them at all. And they can feel very negative or pessimistic. For some people, and as quite a few people have mentioned in the chat box, it can be the emotional side of things that comes out. So the irritability, the tearfulness, or sometimes just being very angry and apprehensive with everything. And I think this is where the swearing comes into it. And for some people, it can be, more of the other behaviours. The smoking, the drinking might increase. Eating patterns might change, insomnia and restlessness, again, because there's just that excess adrenaline and cortisol. They just can't switch off and relax and calm down. So again, notice what your stress signature is, because the sooner we can pick up on these things and we can do something to mitigate the symptoms, the better it is, before we get to the point where we're feeling so overwhelmed that we feel that we just can't cope. So another quick question for you. Do you think stress is good for you? Because it's one of these things that we hear quite a lot. So I'm just interested to know what your thoughts are. And I'm just going to give you a little hint there at the bottom. Just think about your own stress signature. Do you think stress is good for you? Yes or no? What's your thoughts on this? So some people saying a low level can be motivating. Yep, interesting point. Yep. Yeah, we'll come on to that. Some people saying to a certain extent, yeah, but then when you sort of, you notice that you're not sleeping very well, then you notice it's getting quite bad. Yep. So sort of, the general consensus is kind of like a little bit. Really like what you're saying there, Kirsty. Actually, sort of, stress, proper stress in itself, no, but pressure is okay sometimes. Absolutely correct there. I think one of the biggest problems is that quite often people talk about stress in the wrong way, which can muddle it a little bit and make it a bit confusing. And you might hear someone say, "Oh, I've been asked to do this piece of work and I'm really stressed," and you think, you're not really stressed, not like a wild tiger about to attack you. You might be slightly irritated because someone's asked you to do something on a Friday afternoon and you're hoping to finish work early, but that's very different to proper stress. And when we're talking about proper stress, unless it is to save you from being attacked by a wild tiger or, stepping out in the road in front of a car, stress is not good for you. It's not sustainable. Stress raises your heartbeat and your blood pressure. It can weaken your immune system. So if you're feeling stressed, you're more likely to pick up, common colds, bugs, viruses, let alone sort of, COVID. It can increase your blood sugar levels, which obviously can lead to sort of diabetes, heartburn, it can be created, insomnia, and we know the importance of sleep, and it can increase your risk of a heart attack. So, as Kirsty says in the chat, stress, proper stress, isn't good for you. Yes, it's good. It's useful in an emergency to keep you out of danger, perfectly natural response. But in the long run, it's really harmful to our health and our performance. And it's pressure that we're looking for that can motivate us without the need to tip over into stress. And this is probably best described by the pressure and the stress curve. This is something that they use in sports psychology quite a lot when they're looking at the difference between sort of pressure and stress in sports people, whether it's team sports or athletes. So we need a little bit of pressure, so some pressure is good for us, because if we don't have any pressure on us, we can be, almost bored, the task feels the time available, we're clock watching. So we need a little bit of pressure usually, to motivate us, to engage us, to have that clear direction, that we feel, quite efficient, we're in the flow, we're in the zone, get things done. And that leads us to what we call the optimum performance. And, from a sports point of view, this is where we want our athletes, and this is where we want our footballers to be in their optimum performance. So they're training at their best, they're performing at their best, they're winning medals and championships. What we don't want is for people to tip over into the, to the extent that they're feeling really stressed, incredibly anxious, they're irritable. It's that emotional snapping when their stress bucket overflows. They're going to be absolutely tired and exhausted because they're probably not sleeping very well. Really sort of, lots of, worries, lots of self-doubts, lots of indecisions. And if you're trying to plan a wedding, when you're feeling, in this kind of state, it is going to be really, really difficult. So it's really trying to think about, whereabouts are you on the pressure and the stress curve. And again, with kind of like sports people and athletes, we really don't want them to be in the high stress anxiety bit, because that's when they're going to be overtraining, pushing themselves, beyond their limits and capabilities. They're going to be prone to exhaustion and hurting themselves. We want people to be in the optimum performance, and we want, ourselves mentally to be in the optimum performance, where we're making decisions, we're able to sort of, be confident and, have that clarity and that clear direction. So how can we kind of, get to that stage, I guess, really? And I think this is where it's really interesting to look at the difference between sort of handling pressure and stress. And what happens to us is how we respond to this is that, we have a demand placed on us, we need to make a decision, we need to plan something, particularly think about our wedding days, and we think, can I handle this? We make this very quick, automatic, often unconscious decision. And if we think, yeah, I can handle this, it might take a bit of extra work, a bit of extra effort, but ultimately I can do this, we respond to it in a challenge way, but we're up for it, it's fine, we can do it. Whereas if, we need to do something, if we're responding to a demand or a pressure, whether it's something that we need to do ourselves, or whether it's someone else asking us to do something, and we felt, actually, I can't do this, there just isn't enough time for me to do a decent enough job of this. I've got too many other things going on, it's just way too much. We respond to it in a stress way, so it's like, no, can't deal with this, can't handle it. And we get very, very stressed. When we're feeling stressed, we go into that fight, flight, freeze response, so we can become very emotional. We get very reactionary. So we're making those quick knee-jerk decisions and knee-jerk reactions, as opposed to really properly considering things, thinking about, the rationale, the decisions, and being much more considered. And we tend to be in a panic mode. So it's that kind of like that flapping and trying to make a quick decision. And it's quite often when we're in this sort of stress mode that we fire off those emails or the voicemails, we're sort of, ranting and raving. And then the next day you just think, that really was a bit over the top. And that's why sort of, when it comes to planning things like our big day, it's trying not to make those really important decisions from a stress point of view, but just trying to, wherever possible, think about how can I respond to this in a more rational, considered way. And this is what we do when we see things as a challenge. So yes, it's sort of, it's busy, it's demanding, but it's much easier to see the wood for the trees. We can have a lot more clarity around the situation, the decision, the information that we've got. it's also easier for us to ask for support, because quite often when we're feeling stressed, we can feel very cut off and isolated. We withdraw from other people. We almost feel that we just don't have the time to plan things and to prioritize things. We're just doing the quickest thing that we can on our to-do list. And sometimes it can be very difficult to ask for support and to delegate things to other people. But when we're sort of seeing things as a challenge, we can have a much more considered response. We can pause, we can wait, we can take a deep breath, and also we can sort of tap into our knowledge and our experience, thinking about, okay, what have I done before to deal with situations and decisions like this? How can I apply that to this situation? And that is much easier to do if we're coming from a calmer, more considered point, as opposed to that kind of very highly sort of stressed, anxious, emotional way. And I like to think of it a bit, as stress as our sort of sat nav, and just being aware of some of these triggers and some of these signs in ourselves, so that we can preempt some of these and mitigate these a little bit, so we can try and keep on the other end of the upper end of the health, the mental health spectrum, rather than sort of getting into the midst of a situation and then trying to find our way out for it. If we can use our sat nav in the same way that we do for traffic, we don't wait until we're in the middle of a big traffic jam on the motorway, but we can take a detour, we can come up with a plan B or a different route. Might take slightly longer, but we still get there ultimately. So what I'd be interested to know, sort of next question is, what can you do to sort of manage your stress levels, manage your stress bucket? So what are some of the things that you do that can help you relax, unwind, recharge, just that can give you that that bit of clarity, so that when we're responding to demands, to pressures, when we're trying to sort of plan and organize our big day, we can do it from sort of seeing it as a challenge, as opposed to sort of very anxious stress level. So what do you do that helps you unwind, relax, recharge? And again, if you can answer in the chat box for me, please. So what helps you? Oh, a nice long bubble bath, someone is saying. Yeah, those kind of things, just to help us unwind. Going from mountain biking and cooking. Yeah, so, exercise, can be really great for people, doing other things that can just distract us, that takes our mind off, the work things, the important decisions, just distracts our mental energies a little bit. And going hiking, that's another one. Yeah, absolutely. So lots of lovely things that we can do, coming in the chat box there. Lots of things that we can do to cope with stress symptoms. Exercise, as some people have mentioned there in the chat box. Vigorous physical exercise, it can promote serotonin, and it can reduce some of the stress symptoms. If you choose the exercise, if it's something that you enjoy, and obviously if it's within your mobility and fitness levels, you will get way more benefit from me sort of sat here telling you this is what you should or shouldn't do. If it's something that we choose to do and we enjoy it, the benefit will be much more increased. Thinking about those breathers and restorers, so what are the rest and the leisure activities that can just help calm you down and settle you down? So things like a lovely long bubble bath, candles, maybe having a chat with a sort of friend, partner, the cooking, if it's not kind of like that busy sort of cooking, if it's, trying out a new recipe, where you haven't got this sort of time constraint, can be a way to sort of, relax, rest and chill out. Sometimes just reading a book, getting an early night, watching your favorite TV program, but whatever works for you, that can help you sort of, switch off and calm down. And a healthy diet. We all know about sort of food and nutrition. I'm not here to sort of tell us of that, but food, nutrition, being hydrated is really good for us physically and mentally. But the key thing is, though, these are fantastic in terms of dealing with the symptoms of stress, but we also need to deal with the source of the stress as much as we can do. So identifying, where is this stress coming from, and diverting our mental energies towards it. Just want to just talk a little bit about sort of some of the the resilience techniques that we can sort of think about in terms of dealing with stress, dealing with some of the uncertainty. And there's a phrase in boxing, I think it's Mike Tyson, but I'm not 100% sure about that, so don't quote me on that, that everybody has a plan until they get punched in the face. And I think the pandemic, and particularly when when you're planning your wedding day, must be, a huge, plan, punch in the face for people who are trying to plan it. It's absolutely not. Of course, this time 12 months ago, we would not have thought, that we'd still be here, trying to make all these sort of changes and adaptations to our plans. So when it comes to sort of facing setbacks, thinking about how you behave when you face a setback. Do you blame yourself? Do you blame other people? Do you catastrophize things? Do you become sort of quite helpless and feel that there's no way of sort of dealing with things and sort of solving the situation? Some people run away. It's that kind of like that fight or flight mentality. Or some people deny the difficulty. That freeze. Either physically or metaphorically, they go into denial and they don't want to sort of face some things. So noticing, how do you typically respond to setbacks? What kind of like behavior patterns have you seen in yourself? And one of the ways that we can help and support ourselves a little bit when it comes to a resilient mindset is thinking about the 3 Ps. So this situation, the COVID, the lockdown, the restrictions, it's not personal. It's not some kind of big message that is being sort of directed to us and our sort of our plans and stuff like that. This is a situation that is affecting hundreds and thousands and millions of people. So it's not something which is personal. So when we're sort of facing these barriers, challenges, obstacles, not to take things too personally. Excuse me. It's not permanent. Quite often when we're dealing with difficulties, it can feel very overwhelming. It can feel incredibly permanent. But just keeping reminding ourselves that things aren't permanent. Things will change. The lockdown restrictions will ease. Things will get back to normal at some point. But also it's not pervasive as well. So sometimes when we're sort of when we're struggling with things and things aren't quite going so well or to plan, it can feel that everything else is not working either. So just trying to sort of a little bit compartmentalize things as well. Also really trying to focus on what you can control and influence. So one of the the key stress factors is when we're feeling out of control, that we can't deal with things either because there's too much on our plate or the time frame, the deadline is too short. So really trying to focus your mental energies on things that you can control and that you have got some influence over, and as much as you can just trying to let go of some of the things that are really outside of your control that we've got no say over as well. And also sort of planning strategically. And I guess what I mean by this is that when we talk about resilience and we talk quite often about sort of a positive mindset, we don't just mean sort of that blind optimism where you just sort of cross your fingers, hope for the best. What we mean is kind of still planning things, trying to be pragmatic about things, noticing your emotions. They have a place there, but they are also going to be driving your decisions. So just when you're making a decision, just be aware of not making sort of knee-jerk decisions. If you need to change plans or cancel things, just pausing to think about the consequences and the impact that it might have. It might be sort of trying to think ahead, so rather than again sort of thinking in the moment, when you can't always see the wood for the trees, but thinking ahead, to the roadmap that hopefully that's going to be announced next week. If things get worse, if the restrictions aren't lifted as much as we'd like them to be, this is what we're going to do. How are we going to plan for plan B? Or if things get better and the restrictions are lifted, then what can we do differently? So thinking about your options, and it's much easier to do that upfront, proactively, than in the heat of the moment. Maybe creating some decision milestones, so those kind of like the if and whens and the scenario plannings. Again, it's easier to do this, particularly with your partner, ahead of time, as opposed to reacting and responding in the heat of the moment. Where possible, try and prioritize, so what is really important to you for your big day? What are the key things that, are non-negotiable? What are some of the other things that you're happy to be a bit more flexible around? And really keep communication open, with your partner, with friends, with families, but also with your venue, your suppliers, all the people involved in your big day. Keep that communication open because it will make a massive difference. use your support networks, so, keep talking to friends, to families, to partners, because quite often when we're feeling very stressed and overwhelmed, it's very easy for us to sort of almost kind of like hibernate and isolate ourselves and sort of, switch off. But, keeping, contact going can really help us through adversity. Keep in touch with your suppliers, whether that's your existing suppliers that you've already booked, or whether it's potential suppliers. Again, just keeping that communication open so that we don't have those misunderstandings and assumptions. Use the guides for brides. They've got loads of information on their website, lots of information, lots of inspiration. On their website, so please make the most of the information that they've got. But take responsibility, so notice your own emotional state, your words, your actions, or sometimes the lack of them. Be kind and tolerant to yourself and to others. This is really a tough time. You're planning your big day. That can also be a tough time. So just be sort of kind and tolerant. And I think sort of self-compassion is kind of like one of the great words that we've got out of the pandemic as well. But also recognise your own stress bucket levels. What are your triggers? Again, it's going to be different to other people. So be aware of that compare and despair on social media and looking what other people are doing. Recognise your own stress triggers. Your own stress bucket levels as well. Work out what is, what's important to you. At some point, we almost have to sort of not try and sort of compare ourselves to other people too much. Again, I know these are easier things, easier said than done. One of the sort of the fundamental basics that I always sort of talk to people when it comes to mental health is don't overlook the basics. I know that we want the quick fix, we want the reassurances, we want the certainty, we want to be able to plan things, but don't forget about the 5 a day for your own mind. So if you feel like you're feeling a bit overwhelmed, a bit sluggish, difficulty making decisions, planning things, feeling very indecisive, just think about some of the 5 a day for your mind. Have you had enough sleep? If you're running on empty, it's going to be harder to make decisions and be decisive. Have you drunk enough water? We need loads of water for our mental energies. Thinking about what you've eaten, having enough natural light, even in winter months, getting outside in fresh air on a grey day, doesn't have to be sunny, can really help us, and being physically active as well. Again, I know that we know all of this stuff, but it's just reminding us of these things that can just help manage and mitigate some of those stress symptoms that just make things easier to deal with and to handle. So what I would love to know from people as we sort of finish off, what's the key thing that you're going to take away from today's session that's going to help you manage either your mental health in general or your stress levels, particularly when it comes to sort of going forwards and planning your wedding days. Is there anything that you're taking from the session that's particularly resonated with you? That you found helpful. So Nikita there saying the 5 a day. I know it's a great one, isn't it? Yeah, that a 5 a day. And I think it's one of those things that's easy to to remember. And and again, it's all about being sort of proactive. In the same way that we sort of we remember to brush our teeth every day. We don't wait until we've got toothache. So don't wait until you're struggling with mental illness or stress. Think about the 5 a day to keep you at the upper end of the mental health spectrum. Anything else that sort of people will take away from today's session that's going to help them go forwards? And I know I can't wave a magic wand and make things certain and definite for your big days, but think about how we can deal with things. Hopefully managing our stress levels can be a great step forwards. And just while people are responding, I'm just going to put my contact details there, so if anyone wants to get in touch, if there's anything that you want to ask me afterwards, separately about what we've gone through, if you'd like a copy of the slides or anything, please feel free to reach out and get in touch with me. And I do have lots more of these sessions coming up. I'm doing various free open webinars on managing stress, pressure, resilience, and some of those things. Kirsty also saying that she agrees on the 5 a day thing, and that we can control only some things. We can't have complete control over everything. So actually, we're going to run ourselves ragged if we try to control everything. And I think at some level, it's just accepting, things can't be certain, on the big day, the weather, I remember my wedding day, I was really hoping for a sunny day, and, it was a little bit more overcast and cloudy than I'd have liked, but, there's absolutely nothing I could do to change it, but I focused on the people, the friends, the family, the food and the drink there. It's about, the things that I can control is really important, definitely. So I'm going to just stop sharing the slides there for one moment. So unless there's any other questions or any other comments, thank you so much for joining us this evening. I hope you found it useful. As I say, please feel free to reach out and be in touch if there's anything else that I can help with. And all the very best for your big days. I'm going to keep absolutely everything crossed for you for next week on the roadmap. So I do hope you get the day that you want. So Nikita, over to you. Thank you very much.